In today's lecture and next couple of lectures, we will look at some special kinds of network. These are called bipartite networks. So, you already know a little bit about bipartite networks. We have given examples in various occasions on what are bipartite networks and why they are interesting. We will look at into them in some more details. But to start with, we will take a different approach. So, I think all of you know about evolution, and when we talk of evolution, we can have different perspective on it. So, the most common form of evolution that all of you might be familiar with is biological evolution. You know that according to Darwin's theory, from very primitive organisms, slowly by the process of evolution, more complicated beings like us have evolved. Whether you believe it or not, but indeed it's a very fascinating theory. And then there are certain things which human beings can do very nicely, which many other organisms are not capable of doing. And one such very important thing is language. In today's world, we know of no other organisms which have a language like human beings. And by language, I mean not just a plain simple medium of communication. If you consider a medium of communication, then a lot of other organisms do have some way of communication, but by language I mean something which is complicated in the sense it has a recursive syntax and what is known as compositional semantics. You can join words to make different senses. So, such a complex language does not exist for other organisms which we have. So, this is definitely a part of cognitive evolution. Now, whether the cognitive evolution is similar to biological evolution or not is a different question, but that is also a kind of evolution. And the third kind of evolution is cultural evolution. So, you know that even after we had language, initial cultures, human cultures and societies were very primitive, and as we proceeded, as time progressed, more and more complex social organizations came up and more complex cultural things came up. For example, cuisines of any country, any culture is really a complex thing. So, here I take the example of cocktails as a symbolization of culture. The more sophisticated the nature of cocktails are, you could kind of take it as an indicator of how sophisticated the culture is. This is just an analogy, do not take it too seriously. So, the biological evolution takes place in terms of genes. So, actually the genes evolve and genes encode all the information for the for the traits of an organism, whatever you see, the characters of an organism. And for cognitive evolution, you could take the words as the kind of not the marker of evolution or the carrier of evolution, but one of the emergent properties of evolution. Similarly, cocktails are one of the emergent properties of evolution of culture, means if you think that way. So, now the question is, do you think there is anything common between genes, cocktails and words? You said something? Yeah, so you are right. They are typically combination of some smaller subunits, right? Words are sequences of letters. So, if you take the English alphabet, there are 26 letters and every English word is a combination of letters. What about genes? They are sequences of codons. So, I am not sure how many of you remember the biology that you had till class 10th or 12th. So, we will look at it in more details in the next slide, what is a codon and all. And cocktails is of course combination of liquors. So, all of these are some kind of combination or sequences of smaller units. So, such systems are called combinatorial systems, and it is really a very interesting thing to note that two of the greatest wonders of evolution, both life and language, are nothing but combinatorial systems, a special kind of combinatorial system known as discrete combinatorial systems. Why discrete? Because the letters are all discrete units. You combine them in sequence to get words. Similarly, codons are discrete units. There are 64 possible codons and you construct genes out of them. Whereas cocktails are slightly different, these are called blending system. You can take two ingredients of a cocktail and mix them in different proportions to get different kinds of cocktails, or even the same cocktail, maybe slight variation of taste happens based on how well you mix them, and the job of a good bartender is to mix them just to the right proportion. Similarly, colors are very nice example of blending systems. So all colors are obtained as combination of three primary colors, RGB, red, green, blue, and you can mix them in different proportion to get different colors out of it. So there are two kinds of combinatorial systems, discrete combinatorial systems and blending systems. And why this all is interesting to us in the context of bipartite network? They are interesting for two reasons. Firstly, so by now you know that networks can model the evolution of a system, which is typically we do by growth models. So the way the growth model works can be related to the way the natural system has evolved. If you can do so, that would be great, and people typically try to do so. So from that perspective, we are going to study the bipartite networks, the evolution of bipartite networks. And the second thing is, many of these discrete combinatorial systems or blending systems are or can be typically modeled as bipartite networks. Let's see how. So here is the first very basic example. It's about the gene. So to give you some primer on genes, a gene is a sequence of nucleic bases. These bases are of four kinds: A, U, G, and C, and this sequence you can chop at after every three set of nucleic bases. So essentially these three bases together makes what is called a codon, and a codon codes for a amino acid. So a sequence of amino acid makes a protein. So essentially a gene codes for a protein. This is known as central dogma of molecular biology. Now suppose you have a codon, a sequence of gene, sequence of nucleic bases like this. So this is typically a gene, and you slice it after every three nucleic acids, so nucleic bases, so you get actually the codons. So this is one codon, this is another codon, and so on. How many total codons can you have? As I said, there are four nucleic bases, and you can have three in sequence makes a codon. So 4 into 4 into 4, you have 64 possible codons. So you can think of a network like this. It's a bipartite network, so you have two partitions. A, U, G, and C are nucleic bases. So adenine, guanine, and so these are the names sort of. So these are four basically chemical compounds. Now you have 64 codons, and let each of them be represented as a node in the one of the partition of the network. What about the other partition? Each node in the other partition is a gene. So suppose this particular hypothetical gene is represented by this node. Then we add edges to these codon nodes depending on whether this particular codon is present in this particular gene or not. So consider this ACG. It's here once, so we add one edge, and again it's sorry, you can't see this. Here is another ACG actually. So it occurs in this particular hypothetical gene twice. So we add two edges. What about AGA? I think there is no such example as no such codon as AGA, so there is no edge. What is about GAA? It occurs once, so you add one edge, and in this way you construct the whole network. So if I ask you now this question, that how many edges will come out of this gene node, or rather what is the degree of a gene node? So it is simply the number of codon in that gene or length of that gene. And what will be the degree of a codon node? How many? Not only how many genes it occurs in, but how many times it occurs in each gene also. So typically the frequency of that codon in what is known as the genome of that particular organism. So, this is a model of a discrete combinatorial system as a bipartite network. So, we can model a discrete combinatorial system as a bipartite network. Here are some more examples. So, these examples are from languages. So, consider the words. Suppose each word is a node and these are the letters. Now, there will be 26 letters for English. For any other language, the number of letters can be more or less. You can construct the network in the similar way. So, for a node like a word like cat, you add an edge to C, an edge to A, and an edge to T. So, you get a letter word network, which is very similar to the gene codon network. By the way, instead of adding two edges, so suppose you have a word like little. So, in little there are two L's and two T's. Instead of adding two edges to two L's and two edges, sorry, to the L and two edges to T, you could add one edge and put a edge weight of 2. So, that is another way, and both the representations are equivalent. Similarly, you could have a network between words and sentences. So, a sentence is nothing but a sequence of words. So, again in the same manner you can have like rat likes cat. So, one edge goes to rat, one to likes, and one to cat, and so on. So, the word there are several examples within language itself which can be modeled as bipartite networks. And if you look at in general what can be modeled as a bipartite network, then there are more and more things in the domain of biology, in the domain of social sciences, which all can be modeled as bipartite networks. So, some examples are the movie actor network, where one partition is the movies, the other partition is actor, or article author network. So, scientific articles, what are the articles and who have written it. Team player, so players are individuals or persons, and teams are assembly or combination of players. Board directors, train station. Then in biology you can have metabolic pathway and proteins. So, each protein, a metabolic pathway has several proteins involved in it. So, in one partition you have proteins, another partition you have specific metabolic pathways, and you can have connections like this. And a lot of other examples from biology, language, and so on. And some of the very well studied networks are, most of them are very well studied, but one special class of network called collaboration network is one of the very well studied network. In collaboration network, a typical example of which is a movie actor network, one of the partitions are known as ties or collaborations. The other partition is known as actors. So, actors are typically agents who take part in the event or the ties, who together make the event or the ties. So, think of a movie actor network. A movie is a tie, an effect of their collaboration, and actors collaborate in the sense that they act together to make a movie. So, here is a snapshot of a Bollywood movie actor network. It's of course like incomplete, it's just a small set of examples that I have taken. And now you can ask a lot of interesting question about this movie actor network. So, I might ask, how many actors does a movie have and why? Now, how many actors a movie have is basically a matter of how big is the cast, and this how many actors is typically the degree of the movie node. So, asking this question is to ask how do you explain the degree distribution of the movie nodes. Similarly, you could ask how do you explain the degree distribution of the actor nodes, and do you think that this degree distribution of the movie nodes and the degree distribution of the actor nodes will have very similar looking behavior or very different looking behavior? So, you expect them to be different, and we will see why we expect them to be different and if they are really different. But before that, up to this we have shown that there are many different kinds of bipartite networks. So, there are many systems which can be naturally modeled as bipartite networks, especially certain systems which are outcome of evolution, natural evolution, and all these networks can be studied in the same framework as we study the complex networks in general. So, is there any need to specifically study certain properties of bipartite networks? Because we have already studied growth models for in general complex networks, we have studied how to analyze complex networks and so on. So, why do we need to study bipartite networks separately? What is so special about them? So, let us see. So, one interesting thing is bipartite network has two different ways of stating. So, there are two different properties of a network which all kind of implies and is implied by the fact that it is a bipartite network. So, what are these properties? So, you all know what is a bipartite network. There are two partitions and edges run only between the nodes in one set to the other set. There is no edge between the nodes in one partition. So, if a graph is two colorable, then that is a bipartite network and vice versa. Every bipartite network is two colorable. So, to understand this, first you have to understand what is colorability. So, does everyone know what is colorability? So, the colorability means you have to color each node with a different color. Different means you have a set of colors, you have to color the node from that set, but you cannot color two nodes in the same partition with the same, two nodes which share an edge with the same color. So, if there is an edge between node A and node B, they should be colored differently. Now, it is clear that since in a bipartite network there are two partitions, you can color the nodes in one partition in say red and another partition blue. Since edges never run between nodes in one partition, so this is a valid coloring of the graph. So, all bipartite networks are two colorable. On the other hand, if a graph is two colorable, can you show that it is a bipartite? How?
Make the two sets separate. One color. Yeah, that's it.
Right. So, take out all the red nodes and put on one side and all the blue nodes and on one side, and since it's the red blue coloring was valid coloring, therefore, there is no edge, there should not be any edge between the reds and there should not be any edge between the blue. So, naturally you have any two colorable graph is bipartite. The other way of stating that a network is bipartite is to say that the network is triangle free, the graph is triangle free. So, again it should be very clear that a bipartite network is triangle free, isn't it? So, suppose there is a triangle in a bipartite network. So, this is node 1 and it is connected to node 2 and 3, and a triangle means 2 and 3 should be connected, right, and this cannot happen in a bipartite network, because if one is in partition A, then 2 and 3, since they are neighbors of 1, should be in partition B. Therefore, 2 and 3 cannot be connected by definition. So, there is no possibility of having a triangle in a bipartite network. So, a bipartite network is triangle free. You can also prove the reverse, any triangle free graph is bipartite. What about a tree? So, every tree is a bipartite network, and how you color a tree? So, each level gets a different color.
May not be bipartite if it has an odd cycle.
Bipartite must have no odd cycle.
Yeah, sorry. So, a bipartite network, you are right, a bipartite network cannot have an odd cycle. So, a triangle is an odd cycle, but then a cycle of order 5 is also an odd cycle. So, it cannot have any of those cycles. So, yeah, you are right, this is one way implication. So, a bipartite network implies triangle freeness, but a triangle freeness need not imply that it is a bipartite network. So, another word for bipartite network is two mode graphs or two mode networks. This is not very common in general, but it is a little bit common in the network literature. It is called two mode graphs. So in general, why are we interested in bipartite? We can generalize it to k-partite graphs. So it's same. A k-partite graph will have k partitions. There will be no edges running between the partitions, between the nodes in a partition, but only nodes on in different partitions. So it's a three-partite graph might look like this. Three-partite or tripartite graph can look like this, right? So you have these three partitions and edges typically run between these partitions. You can have four-partite and so on. So k is equal to 1 means it's a unipartite graph. So all the nodes are in one partition, and there is nothing special about an unipartite graph. You have already studied unipartite graphs. Any graph is a unipartite graph. K is equal to 2 is bipartite graph, about which we are talking of, and seems like they are interesting. K greater than 2, that is when you have tripartite or four-partite graph, maybe there is some interest from the point of graph theory, but not much from the point of network literature, because many of the properties, as we will see, which the bipartite networks distinctly differ from unipartite networks, is not true for tripartite network and other higher partition. And also there is a unique relationship between colorability of a graph and its the value of k. So if a graph is k-partite, then need not be. Not less than, try to think. If a graph is bipartite, then it is at least 2 colorable. But it can be any other higher colorable. Yes. So a unipartite graph has to be 1 colorable, means has to be in the sense that it can be either, if its chromatic number is say chi, then chi should be greater than equal to k. This is the relationship. You know what's the chromatic number of a graph? It is the minimum number of colors which is required to achieve a coloring of the valid coloring of the graph. So this chi should be greater than equal to k. So one partite graph, a unipartite graph, you can color it using more than one or more than 1 colors. Now whether you can color how many colors you really need depends on the actual structure of the graph. Why? So think of a in general k-partite graph. So it has k partitions and edges run only between these partitions, but not kind of within these partitions. So you can give these k different colors to all these different partitions. Mm-hmm.
If suppose two cells doesn't have any color, common edges, then that two sets can have the same color.
No, two sets can't. Two sets can have the same color if there is no edge running between the two sets. Yeah. So what you are saying is this should be the case. Yeah. So the thing is, this holds true for all other cases except for. First, let's look at the properties related to degree. So degree distribution, is it something special about BNWs? So what's the problem if we plot the degree distribution the same way we plot it for normal unipartite graphs? So you have two partitions and you don't consider the partition divide, you take all the nodes and plot the degree distribution. Think of the movie actor network. Irrespective of whether something is a movie or an actor, you plot the degree distribution considering all of them to be the node of the same network. So do you see any problem there? If you do so?
The distinguish the behavior of the individual nodes.
So in principle you could do that. You could take all the nodes, consider that node network as not as a bipartite network but as a general network, and color it and have the degree distribution. However, there is a problem here. The problem is the physical significance of degree for each of the different partitions is very different. So the physical significance of the degree of a movie node is what? The cast size of a movie, whereas the physical significance of the degree of an actor node is how many movie that actor has acted in. Since there is a difference in the physical significance, it might not be a wise decision to plot the degree distribution collectively. Similarly, the degree is also vary widely. So a cast size of a movie won't be very large. It might be 5, 10. If you consider only the main people, it would be 2, 3, 5, something of that range. But if you consider how many movies an actor has acted in, that range is very large. It could be something from 1 to 100. Somebody can act in some 100 movies. So this is another distinction. So the degree distribution of the two different partitions, both the physical sense of degree as well as the range of the variance of the degree, all are very different for the partitions. So it usually makes no sense to plot it collectively. So people study the degree distribution separately, once for the actor nodes and once for the tie nodes. So what happens if you study them together and what happens when you study them separately is something like this. Suppose this is the degree distribution of the actor nodes and this is the tie nodes. So typically actor nodes follow a power law kind of behavior. So this is not in a log-log plot. So it shows a power law kind of a behavior, whereas the tie nodes show more like a normal distribution like behavior. So why? Because as I said, most of the movies will have some 3, 4 and some less than 3, 4, some little bit more than. So it shows a normal distribution like behavior, and here there will be some very popular actor but acting in large number of movies, but their number will be very little. So they will lie somewhere here in this zone, whereas there will be some most of the actors who has acted in only very few movies. And if you plot these two together, you get sometimes this kind of a degree distribution. It's called a 2-mode degree distribution. So this is one mode and this is another mode of the degree distribution. So people have observed such 2-mode degree distribution when they collectively draw it, but this is not of much interest. Like people initially tried to analyze it, but later they thought it makes sense to plot the degree distribution separately and analyze them separately. And about degree centrality. So degree centrality of a node in a network is what is its degree typically. What is its degree? Sometimes you normalize it by some factor like the max degree or total number of the highest degree possible and so on. So do you think we need some modification in the case of bipartite networks for degree centrality?
In degrees and out degrees. For a
It's
particular-
so we are considering for the time being undirected networks.
In degree meaning that from one partite set edges are coming into it, and out degree means that edges from this partite set to the other.
So let me reframe the question. Suppose you have a movie actor network and the degree of a movie is say 5 and the degree of an actor is 25. So can you say that the movie node is less central than the actor node? Right. So you have different centralities for the two partitions, and suppose you want to compare the two partitions, then ideally you should normalize them separately. And how typically you normalize? In this case, what's the max degree? So suppose these are movies and you have M movies and these are actors and you have N actors, and this is a particular node with degree K1 and this is a particular actor node with degree K2. So how do you normalize? Right. So, the max possible degree for a movie node is n, it can have up to n actors. So, you normalize it by n, and the max possible degree for actor node is m. So, you normalize it by m. So, depending on which partition a node belongs to, its degree is normalized by the cardinality of the other partition. So, then you might compare the degrees, the degree centrality of the nodes even when they belong to different partitions. We can similarly talk of the other centralities. So, what about closeness centrality of a bipartite network? So, do you remember what is closeness centrality?
Yeah. Shorts all pairs.
You take shortest path to all pairs of nodes, right. So, do you think here also you need some different normalization?
To the other side, that's even. But
It need not be, since you are talking of all pairs of nodes. So, what would be the ideal case? If this particular node is very central to this whole network, as far as the closeness centrality, then it should be connected to all these through one edge. So, if there are n such nodes, so it should be connected to all of them through one edge, which is n, whereas to every node in this partition, its connection should be of length 2. So, there are how many nodes? M minus 1 nodes, because you do not look at connection to itself into 2. So, the max, the best possible closeness centrality for this particular node is reciprocal of this. No, it's the best possible, it's the bound, and then you use, and you see for any node in this partition it will be this. So, you normalize the closeness, you calculate the shortest path to all other nodes and then normalize by this. And if certain nodes are unreachable, if the graph is disconnected, we have seen there are problems in defining things like closeness centrality. Even you have problems in defining eigenvector centrality if the graph is disconnected. So, we assume that the graph is connected when we do this computation. What about betweenness centrality? So, similarly you can compute what should be the normalizing factor for betweenness centrality for the two partitions, and those are much more complicated. So, this particular reference extending centrality has all these formulas, like how do you compute the normalization factor for betweenness centrality and eigenvector centrality and so on. Now, eigenvector centrality we already discussed, actually is interesting for bipartite network, because the steady state distribution oscillates. So, once it is for one partition you have some steady state distribution and the other partition it's 0, and in the next iteration all the nodes in partition B gets some positive probability, whereas the other partition gets 0. So, it oscillates between 0 and a positive probability. So, that is why also it is interesting, and you could consider the positive probability, the non-zero one, as the eigenvector centrality and ignore the 0 one. Yes, and now the most important question, what is the clustering coefficient of a bipartite network? So, bipartite network by definition is triangle free. So, the clustering coefficient is 0, but is it interesting? So, what is the idea of clustering coefficient? So, you can think of it in two ways. One is the graph clustered in some sense? Are there natural clusters in the graph? If the graph is really a large number of natural clusters, then its clustering coefficient should be high. This is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is friends of friends. So, how probable is the fact that two of my friends are friends themselves? That we ask for a general graph. But for bipartite graph, it's useless to ask that question, because two of my friends can never be friends because they are in the same partition. So, can we ask for some other question?
Bipartite itself is
End of
divided
end
into
of
two
it.
clusters.
No.
You can ask whether acted in the same.
See, this is a misconception which you should clarify from the very beginning. Think of a graph like this. Do you think all these nodes belong? So suppose you apply a normal clustering algorithm, any clustering, you take any clustering algorithm, treat this graph as a non-bipartite graph, as a general graph and apply it. Do you think that all these nodes will come to one partition and all these nodes will come to another partition? I mean, all these nodes will be in one cluster and all these nodes will be in another cluster? Not at all, because it will be just opposite. There are edges running between this node and this node. So there is high likelihood that these two will be in the same cluster rather than these two, because there is no edge between them. So it's not the case. But would such a cluster reveal anything, you know, worthwhile? So usually for a bipartite network, what people do is biclustering. So you don't cluster the whole network thinking that it's a general graph, but you simultaneously try to cluster this partition and this partition using a particular concept, and this concept is something like this. So suppose I have, this is partition A of actors, and this is say ties, so this is T1. So suppose A1 and T1 is connected to both A1 and A2. We can't ask this question whether A1 and A2 are connected, because we don't know they aren't. But we could ask if there is some T2 to which both A1 and A2 are connected, right? And in the case of bipartite networks, this is the question that we ask while clustering as well as while computing the clustering coefficient. So essentially we are asking, is there a common friend of two friends of mine? How many common friends are there of two friends of mine? And why this is an interesting question to ask in the case of bipartite network rather than asking the more general question is because, you see, think it in this way. T1 is a movie, okay, it's better to think in terms of actor. So A1 and A2 are two actors and they have acted in this movie. So A1 is an actor and A1 has acted in the movie T1 and T2. Now if there is another actor A2 who has also acted in the movie T1 and T2, then A1 and A2 ought to have a closer relationship. So if you look at the movie actor network, there will be always, you know, Shah Rukh Khan and Kajol featuring in large number of movies together. So what it says is somehow that pair might be able to, you know, get more hits or whatever. So they have a nice chemistry between them. The dynamics works well between them. So typically this is what, so if you look at article author network, you will find two authors collaborating a lot. So what, and in this case, you know, if author 1 and author 2 has written one paper together, then there is a probability that they write more papers together. And if this happens, then the network has natural clusters. So there is a set of authors who always write papers together. There is another set of authors who always write papers together. So that is the natural social clusters we are talking of.
So instead of triangles, we are looking for event length cycles.
Yes, but not general even length cycle. We are looking for squares, length 4 cycles. So the clustering coefficient for general network is often called known as C3 because you are counting the number of triangles. For bipartite network, you count the number of squares, C4. So remember, this is a square, right? A2, T1, A1, T2. So this is a square that you are looking for. So you are trying to compute the number of squares and the probability of observing a square. These are 4 length cycles.
Yeah, but is it not just enough that A1 and A2 just share T1? They already are connected to T1.
Yeah, A1 and A2 shares T1 is fine, means that's what you are observing. But if, you know, A1, A2 shares T1 and A2, A3 shares T2, and so on, but A1 doesn't share T2, then what is happening in such a system? Think of a movie actor network. What essentially is happening is you are randomly picking up actors and pairing them and getting a movie. So which is not the case. So typically that is also the case for small world networks. Think of a social network of friends. Why it is more probable that friends of friends are also friends? So two friends of yours are likely to be friends. Why this is the case? It would not have been the case if you randomly, you know, insert the edges, right? So there is a structure. So here also it's the same, you know, basic idea. It's not that you pick up a movie and randomly pack actors into them. While selecting the actor, you not only look at this actor, but also other co-actors who have other movies with this particular actor, which were probably hit and things like that. So that's the natural cluster. When people collaborate on scientific publications, it's not that, you know, they randomly pick up, so today I will write a paper with you, tomorrow I will write a paper with some another guy, and day after tomorrow I will write with somebody else. It doesn't work like that. So people collaborate and they write paper on the same topic with same set of people. So these natural clusterings or clusters are kind of captured by C4. The number of, if this is the phenomenon that's happening, then you have a lot of squares in the graph. So you count the number of squares instead of the number of triangles, but the normalizing factor here is little difficult to obtain and slightly controversial. There are two different formulas for the denominator. I liked this one, so I will talk about this one. So let's see. Suppose you are looking at a node I and trying to, you know, calculate its clustering coefficient. There are two nodes M and N to which I is connected. Then for every such pair, the clustering coefficient you calculate is something like this. So what is QIMN? QIMN is the number of nodes. So let me call them. So the number of nodes of this kind is called QIMN, which are all connected to both M and N. So basically the number of squares you are observing imposed that uses I, M and N, all these three nodes, is QIMN. This is the definition, this is the number of observed squares. Okay. And you divide it by total number of squares that are possible. There also the formula was similar, right? You observe the number of triangles and divide it by total number of triangles possible. But there the total number of triangles possible was simply K C2, if its degree was K. Here what you do is, suppose degree of this particular node is Km and degree of this particular node is Kn. So there are other nodes, say Y1, Y2, which are connected to this. So this is Kn, which are not connected to M. So degree of this node is Kn, out of which 1 goes to I. So you subtract that, and out of which QIMN are already connected. So you subtract that. So what is the number of nodes which are of this sort, which are not connected to M but connected to N? It is this particular number, right? Kn minus 1 minus QIMN. Call this quantity QIMN plus 1 as eta IMN. Okay. Then you could rewrite this as number of such nodes that are connected to N but not connected to M as Kn minus eta IMN. Clear? And all this could have been connected to M, in which case you would have observed squares. And similarly you make this computation for the other guy, that is M, and that number comes out to be Km minus eta IMN, and then you add these two to get all these dangling nodes which are not connected to one of the neighbors, means either m or n, but one of them, and these are the nodes q, I, m, n which are connected to both. So, essentially the total number of neighbors of m and n, counting you know the set that either goes from m or n, at least one of them or both maybe, is km minus eta I m n plus kn minus eta I. So, this term plus q I m n, the common one. So, it is the total number of neighbors of m and n in the other partition minus I, the neighbor I. So, you consider these to be the possible number of squares that you could have observed, out of which you only observe k I m n. So, essentially what you are saying is, if the actor I has acted in 2 movies m and n, then you add up the cast size, all the unique casts of m and n, and ideally I could have co-acted with all of them, because he has acted both in m and n, but maybe he has not co-acted in any other movie with all of them. So, you count the ratio, that gives you the probability. This is one possible way. Another possible way is they multiply actually these two terms, and look at this particular reference. It takes up some real examples and compute the clustering coefficient using both the formulas, and try to say try to show why this particular one gives more reasonable values than the other one. Yeah. So, for every pair m and n to which I is connected, you do this computation. So, for every pair you get a different clustering coefficient for the node. Instead of clustering coefficient in one mode, in a general graph, where you get a single value for the whole node, here for every pair you get a different value.
It should have single value.
You can average it out.
Then depending on, you could average it out, you could means add them, means whatever way you want to do it, you can do it. Means it's a vector, then you can finally get a single value out of it if you want. And the last important concept that we will cover today before we move on to something else tomorrow is called the one mode projection of a bipartite network. So this slide should be looking familiar to you. We have already discussed this during the spectral analysis, one example, the spectral analysis. So I will cover it very briefly. So what is a one mode projection of a bipartite network? Consider this bipartite network in the middle. A one mode projection onto the node of, say these are the actors and these are the movies, suppose. So onto the set of actors is a graph where the nodes are the actors, and 2 actors have an edge weight of W if they have co-acted in W movies, as simple as that. So here this particular actor K and this particular actor T has co-acted in 2 movies, that is what it says. Let us see, movie 4 and movie 2, right. So only 2 movies, so that is why they have an edge weight of 2. Similarly, you can see that the other edge weights can be, so N and D has co-acted in only 1 movie, which is 4, and no other common movie. So this is the one mode projection of the bipartite network onto the set of actors. Similarly, you can have one mode projection onto the set of movies. So that would be 2 movies are connected by an edge weight W if there are W common actors in their casts. And again, we also have covered this. This is the adjacency matrix representation of the 2. So suppose the matrix representation for this bipartite network is A. Note that A is not exactly the adjacency matrix, because it is not a square matrix. It is a n cross M matrix. There are n actors and m movies, so it is an n cross m matrix, and this particular column is, so ijth entry is 1 if the ith actor has acted in the jth movie. So, you make this graph and you can get these adjacency matrices of the projections, one more projections as A transpose minus the diagonal matrix. So why we want to subtract the diagonal matrix, because when you do A transpose, the diagonal entries of this particular matrix is the degrees of each of the actor nodes. So remember, A transpose will be an n cross n matrix and A transpose A will be a m cross m matrix, and the diagonal entries will be nothing but the degrees of these nodes. We subtract those degrees because we do not want self loops. So this is an adjacency matrix without the self loop. So this is the one mode projection, and now you can relate this to the concept of clustering coefficient and clustering that we discussed just before. So the clustering coefficient of a node in this particular network will be very much related to the earlier definition of clustering coefficient, because here you are looking for how many such nodes they have, how many movies two actors have acted in, and you look at other, so the clustering coefficient in this network will be sort of reminiscent of the clustering coefficient of a node in this network. And finally, one very simple but interesting result, not result, idea. So every complex network can have an underlying bipartite structure. How? So think of one mode projection. So from a bipartite network, you can go to a one mode projection and get a general graph. Is it possible to take any general graph and go back to its underlying bipartite networks? Or is there any underlying bipartite network at all?
No, can be done.
It turns out that you can do it, and the representation is in fact unique. Think of a network like this. So what you do is you count the number of clicks in this network, 1 click, 2 click, 3 click. So for every large click, so for example, this is a triangle which is 1 click, this is another triangle which is 1 click, and this edge is a 2 click. Actually, this is a 3 click, this is a 3 click, and this is a 2 click. So for this, you introduce a node, let's call it 1. For this, you introduce a node, which call it 2, and this introduce a node, we call it 3. And these nodes A, B, C, D, E, F so A is connected to 1, this is connected to 1, this is connected to 1, this is connected to D, E, F, and what about this? So C is connected to 2, D is also connected to 2. So if you look at this bipartite network and take its one mode projection, you will get this network. Are you convinced? Think about it. If not, we will again take it up tomorrow and see how exactly this happens and why this is sort of a unique way of decomposing a bipartite network, any general network into an underlying bipartite network. So we stop it here today, continue from here tomorrow.